It's the summer of 90 AD in Rome. The sun is straight overhead. A man stands on a wooden platform under the floor of the arena in the dark. His name didn't survive. The records of who he was, what he did, where he came from, all of that is gone. What survives is the building. His hands are tied behind his back. Above him, 50,000 people are eating lunch. He can hear them through the floor. He can't see them. Somewhere very close, a lion is breathing. The cell he was held in last night had no window. The corridor he was marched through this morning was narrow enough that his shoulders brushed the walls. None of this was an accident. There are 36 trapdoors in the floor of the arena. He doesn't know which one is his. He doesn't know whether he'll be lifted up to meet the animal or whether the animal will be lifted up to meet him. The sand above his head has already been changed 3 times today to cover what was there before. The hour he is being killed in, noon, the dead middle of the day, the hour between the morning hunts and the afternoon gladiators, was chosen on purpose. The Emperor Domitian is in the imperial box eating. That too was chosen on purpose. Someone pulls a lever. A counterweight drops. The platform begins to rise. The thing he is being killed by isn't really the lion. To understand what's about to happen to him, you have to understand who built the building. 21 years before this moment, in 69 AD, Rome had survived the worst year in its history. 4 emperors, civil war, the Capitoline Temple burned, the treasury empty. Nero, the previous emperor, had been declared a public enemy and forced to take his own life, and the man who replaced him, Galba, had been murdered in the Forum within 7 months. The man who replaced him lasted 3 months. The one after that, 8. Then a soldier named Titus Flavius Vespasianus arrived from the eastern provinces with an army and the political instinct of someone who had been waiting his whole life. He was nearly 60 years old. He was the son of a tax collector. He had no aristocratic blood. He was, by senatorial standards, nobody. To stay in power, he needed to do something Nero had failed at. He needed to convince the city of Rome that the empire belonged to them and not to him. So he gave them a present. In the center of the city, on the most valuable real estate in the empire, Nero had built himself a private pleasure palace called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It included a man-made lake. The palace covered an area roughly the size of 200 football fields. It was the most extravagant piece of personal architecture in Roman history, and the people hated it for what it represented. A single man behaving as if the city were his. Vespasian drained the lake. The message was unmistakable. Where Nero had taken from the city, Vespasian would give back. Where one man had hoarded the most beautiful land in Rome for his own pleasure, 50,000 citizens would now gather at his expense. The new building wasn't called the Colosseum yet. That name came later, borrowed from a colossal statue of Nero that still stood nearby, repurposed and reheaded into a statue of the sun god. On top of it, he began to build something the Roman world had never seen. Not a temple, not a palace, not a forum, an arena. The largest amphitheater ever attempted, built on the site of an emperor's private playground, paid for by the spoils of the Jewish war, the silver, the gold, the slaves taken from the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Tens of thousands of those slaves were sent to Rome to build it. It took 10 years. Vespasian didn't live to see it finished. His son Titus did. When the Flavian Amphitheater, what we now call the Colosseum, opened in 80 AD, Titus declared 100 days of games. The Roman writer Cassius Dio, writing more than a century later, recorded the toll. 9,000 animals killed, an unknown number of human beings. The crowd was given free admission, free wine, free bread, and the right to watch death from close enough to smell it. This was the gift. The genius of what the Flavians built, and the horror, was that almost none of it was visible to the people inside it. The Colosseum was a machine. You can see this clearly only when you strip away the marble and the statues and look at what's left. A building engineered with an obsession that borders on something darker than ambition. Start at the outside. The structure had 80 entrances. 76 were for the public. Each was numbered in Roman numerals carved above the arch. Every ticket, the Romans called them tesserae, small bone or pottery discs, was stamped with an entrance, a section, a row, a seat. A spectator walked up to his assigned arch and went directly to his place. No queuing, no confusion. The full capacity of 50,000 could be filled in under an hour and emptied in roughly 15 minutes through the vaulted ramps the Romans called vomitoria. The word means what it sounds like. The building was designed to swallow a city and then to disgorge it. The exterior rose in 4 tiers. 3 of them were arched. The columns framing each arch climbed in order. Doric at the bottom, then Ionic, then Corinthian, the same orders the Greeks had used on their temples, now stacked one on top of another in a way no Greek architect would have permitted. The top tier was a flat wall, pierced with small rectangular windows and decorated with bronze shields. Each of the arches on the lower 3 tiers held a statue. The building announced what it was from a mile away. Once inside, the spectator found his seat in a system that was less an architecture than a hierarchy made literal. The front row, closest to the killing, was reserved by law for senators. Their seats were marble, carved with their names. Behind them sat the equestrian class. Behind them, ordinary Roman citizens. Behind them, freedmen. At the very top, near the sky, sat women, slaves, and the poor. Anyone the Romans considered closer to the spectacle than to the spectators. The Vestal Virgins had their own box at ground level, opposite the emperor. The emperor's box was on the north side of the long axis, in the perfect line of sight to the kill. Above them all, when the sun was bad, a canopy was unfurled. The Velarium. It was operated by a detachment of sailors brought in from the imperial fleet at Misenum because the rigging required men trained in handling sail. 1,000 sailors to shade an audience. Now go below. Under the wooden floor of the arena, 2 stories down, was the hypogeum. This is the part most visitors today see and don't understand. It looks like ruins. It was a basement, but the word doesn't carry what it was. The hypogeum was a network of corridors, cells, holding pens, and machinery. 32 cages for animals, 36 trapdoors in the floor above, 80 winches operated by slaves, lifting platforms up into the arena on cue. There were elevators in the Colosseum in the 1st century. They were powered by men. The whole thing was choreographed. A scenery painter and an animal handler and a master of executions all worked in the dark beneath the floor, listening for a signal from above, moving their pieces into position. A forest could appear in the arena in under a minute. A trap door would open and a leopard would walk out of the earth into sunlight, and the crowd, who had been told that morning what to expect, would still gasp. The architect's name didn't survive. We don't know who designed this. Whoever it was understood human beings in a way that should disturb anyone who reads about it carefully. The building wasn't built to host violence. It was built to refine it. A day at the Colosseum had 3 acts. They never changed. The Romans liked their entertainment the way they liked their meals, in order, on time, predictable. In the morning came the venations, the hunts. Animals brought in from the far edges of the empire, kept in pens beneath the floor, released to fight men trained to kill them, or more often, to fight each other. Lions from North Africa, bears from Caledonia, crocodiles from the Nile, elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers from as far east as the Persian frontier. The logistics of getting these animals to roam alive were enormous. Some of them traveled for months in cages, on ships, across deserts. Many didn't survive the journey. The ones that did were starved before the games to make them aggressive. The hunts were also a kind of imperial advertisement. Every animal in the arena represented territory Rome had reached. A crocodile meant Egypt, a bear meant the northern forests, a tiger meant the eastern frontier. The empire was being put on display, then killed in front of the people who paid for it. The morning hunts were considered respectable. Senators attended. Children attended. At noon came the executions. This is the act most Roman writers don't describe in detail because most Roman writers found it boring. The condemned were brought into the arena. Men sentenced to death for crimes the state had decided required public death. Christians, sometimes, bandits, deserters, prisoners of war. The methods varied. Damnatio ad bestias, death by beasts, meant the condemned was tied to a stake or pushed into the arena unarmed and animals were released. Damnatio ad gladium meant the condemned were given weapons and made to kill each other until one was left, and then that one was killed by a fresh executioner. Some were burned alive. Some were dressed in costumes from mythology and killed in tableau. A man playing Orpheus would be torn apart by a real bear on schedule while musicians played. The midday crowd was thinner. Most Romans went home to eat. The people who stayed were the people who came for this. In the afternoon came the gladiators, the famous part, the part the films are about. Trained fighters, mostly slaves, some volunteers, fighting each other in pairs or small groups, in elaborate combinations designed to test different skills against each other. A heavily armored fighter against a fast, lightly armed one. A man with a net against a man with a shield. The gladiators were professionals. Their fights could be long. They could be skillful. They were the only part of the day where the Roman audience saw something close to art, and most gladiators didn't die in their fights. The economics of training a gladiator were too expensive for that. The schools that owned them charged the games organizers a rental fee and a much higher one if the fighter was killed. The estimate now is that perhaps 1 in 5 gladiator bouts ended in death. The estimate for the noon hour is 100%. Go back to the man on the platform. The lever has been pulled. The counterweight has dropped. He is rising through the floor of the arena into sunlight he can't yet see because his eyes have spent the last several hours in the dark. The crowd above him doesn't fall silent. The crowd is eating. The hour was chosen so that the spectacle would not interrupt lunch. A herald announces what he has done, the crime, real or invented, that has put him here. And the announcement is part of the design too, because the audience needs to know they're watching justice and not something else. He reaches the surface. The light hits him. He has, at most, a few seconds to understand where he is. On the far side of the arena, another trapdoor opens. The lion that was released into a holding pen this morning that was kept without food for 2 days before that has been pacing in the dark for hours listening to a sound it doesn't understand. That animal walks out into the sand. The architecture has done everything it can do. From this point, the building is a spectator. What happens next is what the building was built for. The emperor, in his box, doesn't look. Cassius Dio noted that emperors often worked through executions, signing documents, hearing petitioners. The killing was background. The building made it possible for the killing to be background. When it is over, the sand is raked. New sand is laid down. A different trapdoor opens. The next condemned man is rising. About 15 years before the games began, a Roman philosopher named Lucius Annaeus Seneca went to one of Rome's arenas at noon by accident. He had meant to arrive earlier for the morning hunts, which he understood to be the educated portion of the day. He arrived late, found himself in the middle of the executions, and stayed long enough to be changed by it. He wrote about it afterward, in a letter to his friend Lucilius. The letter survives. It is the 7th of his moral epistles. By chance, I attended a midday exhibition, expecting some fun, wit, and relaxation. It was quite the contrary. In the morning, men are thrown to lions and bears. At noon, they are thrown to the spectators. He went on for several pages. He described men without armor, men without training, told to kill each other for the amusement of a crowd that called out for more wounds, more blood, more death. He described the audience as more dangerous than the killers. He wrote that he came back from the games crueler than he had gone in because he had been among human beings. He was Nero's tutor. He was, at the time he wrote that letter, one of the most powerful men in Rome. He didn't stop it. He didn't try. Stories like this don't come together quickly. The Romans themselves left contradictions on almost every page. The numbers don't agree, the names don't agree. The dates wobble depending on whose account you trust. If you've stayed this far and you want to be here when I find the next one, the subscribe button is how I find you again. This is the question that should sit harder than it does. Rome had philosophers. Rome had Christians, eventually, who claimed a moral framework that explicitly forbade this. Rome had emperors who could have closed the building with a single decree. The games continued for almost 400 years after the building opened. After Seneca wrote his letter, animal hunts continued until at least 523 AD. Gladiatorial combat was officially banned around 404 AD, and then continued unofficially for another century. 400 years. Even the philosopher emperors kept the games running. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic, the one whose private notebooks would become a foundational text of Western ethics, sat in the imperial box and watched the killing for the same political reasons every other emperor did. He wrote in his Meditations that he found the spectacles tedious. He kept attending them anyway. He kept funding them. The answer is the one Juvenal gave in a single line, around 100 AD, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The Roman state had discovered, somewhere in the 1st century, that a population fed and entertained will not riot. A population that gets free grain and free spectacle every few weeks will tolerate emperors it would otherwise have killed. The Colosseum wasn't built only as a gift. It was built as an instrument of political stability. To close the building would have been to ask the Roman mob what else might satisfy them. Nobody who had to live in Rome wanted to find out. So it continued, through emperors who knew it was wrong, through philosophers who wrote against it, through Christian bishops who preached against it from pulpits within sight of its walls. It continued because what it provided, the daily proof that Rome was the center of the world and that the world could be summoned into a building and killed, was something the empire couldn't yet imagine itself without. The Colosseum stopped hosting games sometime in the 6th century. Nobody recorded the last one. The building stood empty for a long time. In the medieval period, Romans began to use it as a quarry. The marble facing was stripped first. The travertine blocks went next, hauled away to build churches and palaces. St. Peter's Basilica contains stone from the Colosseum. So does the Palazzo Venezia. So do half the noble houses of Renaissance Rome. Earthquakes did the rest. The big ones came in 847 and 1349. The south side collapsed. The hypogeum filled with rubble and was buried for centuries. By the time Pope Benedict XIV consecrated the ruin in 1749, declaring it a holy site of Christian martyrdom, the building had been disused for almost 1,000 years, and the claim of mass Christian martyrdom there was largely undocumented. The consecration may have done more to preserve the structure than any other single act in its history. The stripping stopped. The quarrying stopped. What was left, about 1/3 of the original, became the ruin we have now. It is the most visited monument in Italy. More than 7 million people pay to walk through it every year. On a summer afternoon in modern Rome, the line to enter the Colosseum stretches for 200 meters down the Via dei Fori Imperiali. Tourists hold up their phones. Guides explain the engineering. Children eat ice cream in the shade of the arches. The hypogeum is open to visitors now. You can walk down into it. You can stand in the room where the man on the platform stood. The trapdoor mechanisms are gone, but you can see the grooves where they sat. You can see the cages where the animals waited. The sun comes through the missing roof. The sand is gone. What's left is the architecture. The building still works. Rome wasn't the first to do this. It wasn't the last either. Every civilization we now remember as great built its prosperity on top of a system that produced suffering at scale. And most of them, like Rome, built that system into stone, or into law, or into the daily routines of ordinary people, so deeply that nobody alive at the time could see it. The Spartans did it with slavery. The Athenians did it with their democracy. The Egyptians did it with the labor that built the monuments we still photograph. The pattern repeats with a consistency that should bother anyone who looks at it for long enough. The untold history of civilizations is what that pattern looks like once you start tracing it. The next piece of that history is already on the right of the screen here,